Hi, tonight we're going to talk about going off-road in your career journey. The idea that career is a straight road where you go from getting a job, getting promoted, and moving into management is a 20th century construct. None of us have a thought about understanding that Thomas Jefferson ran a farm and a vineyard, architected the buildings and the curriculum of the University of Virginia, served as governor, vice president, president, and lots more things. He was a very busy guy. And yet we're completely flabbergasted when a friend tells us they want to move from human resources into operations management. We need to rethink career transition and career choice, creative choice, for this generation, a generation which, by choice or economic necessity, is almost certain to have serial careers. At this point in time, many companies don't hire long-term employees, and for those people who do get hired, jobs become obsolete extremely quickly with the advance of technology. And a lot of people decide that as the rest of their life advances and moves forward, that they need to be adapting their career to work with it as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit later on about ideas for smart transition, but first I want to tell a little bit of my own story. I graduated from Michigan State University in 1984 with a degree in criminology and no long-term plans. I decided that I wanted to be an Asia bum for as long as I possibly could, and to some this seemed like a pretty flighty idea, but it wasn't. I knew that I had a very limited window within which to see a pre-industrialized China, and I wasn't going to miss it. So I worked for 2 years waiting tables. I saved every penny I could. I sold my album collection. It was the 80s. We all had album collections. Mine was really good, by the way, so that hurt. I took all that money and I bought a one-way ticket. And 3 days after graduation, I packed up my backpack and my boyfriend, and we took off to Taiwan. In Taipei, we taught English, and again, we tried to save every penny we could so we could travel as much as we could. We lived in some serious squalor. For the first 3 months I was there, I slept on a board covered with linoleum. And we saved everything, and we took off and we went to China. And in the beginning, we did the things that you would expect people who went to China to do. We went and we saw Mao's remains, and we walked along the wall and did all that sort of thing. But quite quickly, we decided to jump off-road. We lived really frugally, $150 a month for the two of us. We ate street food, we lived in hovels. We traveled by water buffalo drawn carts down the streets of cities where now you can't get around all of the luxury automobiles and the neon signs. And when we traveled from city to city, we traveled by train, and we traveled hard seat, which is essentially steerage, with chickens and God only knows what else smacking against our legs and pecking at our knees. And we left the big cities of the eastern part of China, which at that point some people had spent some time on, and we went to the much more remote western part of China. And there we viewed the terraced paddies, and we visited the stone forest, and we saw the unbelievable temples in the western hills of China, which had escaped being destroyed during the Cultural Revolution years because they were so remote nobody got to them, basically. We went on and we went to the more agricultural regions. We went to Dali, and we slept in barns and bathed out of walks because there was no running water. We hitchhiked to Lhasa, Tibet. And when we were there, we were really thrilled to be invited to witness a sky burial at dawn. In sky burial, there's permafrost in Tibet. And so when people die, the bodies are left to decompose for a time, and then they're cut in a ritual fashion and laid out so the vultures can come in and get them. And people who are asked to witness that stay in silence and witness as the bones are picked clean. We had adventures outside of China as well, in Koh Samui, Tibet. Koh Samui, Thailand, sorry, wrong country. Koh Samui, Thailand, all the generators on the island would go off at 10 o'clock at night, and we would go and throw water in the air, and we would be treated to these unbelievable fireworks caused by single-celled iridescent organisms that lived in the perfectly clear water lit by the moon. Those are just a few of the adventures we had. There was a lot of them. We traveled for a long time. And as you might expect, when you're doing this kind of travel, when you're traveling in places where there are no cruise directors, a lot went wrong. Some because we made mistakes, and some just because, it was uncharted territory. And we learned how to deal with those issues. We learned how to confront those problems and problem solve, get out of the scrapes that we got into, and move on to our next adventure. And to do that, we always kept an inventory of what resources we had, what skills we had. We linked up with other travelers, and we found out what resources and skills they had. And we found out how to broker those resources and skills to get what we needed. Who was best equipped on that day to make sure that we had food and shelter and the materials we needed to move on to our next adventure? Who had been someplace before and knew something that we should know before we went there or didn't want to go there? So it was a pretty crazy time, and it was an absolute unmitigated success, that trip. Like all the best choices, it taught me more about myself. I learned about others. I learned new skills, new experiences. I grew in every possible way. But everything comes to an end. And as the time for my return to the States drew nearer, I started listening to the voices of the universe, or probably really the voices of my parents, telling me that it was time to get on a more traditional road to success. And so I did what a lot of social science majors do when they have no idea what their future is supposed to hold, and I went to law school. I graduated from law school during an economic downturn, so much for safety, and a lot of my friends didn't get jobs, but I did, and I got a really good job. And the reason I got a really good job is because I knew how to get things done in China. And at that point in time, that was an extremely unusual skill. So I was actually pretty in demand. It was that part of it was really fun, but I had so much of what I had learned from my travel ended up informing what I did at that time. It wasn't just the mere fact of knowing how to get things done in China, but I had learned to see things in a different way. I grew up in a Midwestern suburb, and I saw things in a pretty linear way. Everybody around me had very similar life experiences, so there were right and wrong answers to things. And you realize when you get outside of your bubble that there's, in fact, almost never one single right answer to any question. Sometimes there's millions of them. You learn that the truth of any matter completely changes based on the moment that you enter and leave a story because the facts that are available change. We learned how to problem solve with no money and no parents to save the day. Those are skills that honestly still remain pretty much the most important skills that I've ever learned in my life. And so that seemingly childish whim that we talked about, that in fact turned out to be the most meaningful experience of my life, my formative experience. The decision to go to law school was a Hail Mary pass. I didn't know what else to do, and all it really did was push the rock down the road so that I didn't have to make big decisions about my life. So I actually loved law school. We won't bash law school completely here. Law school gave a structure to my thoughts and my writing that I really valued, and there was an intellectual rigor that was exciting. But law practice, not so much. It never really suited me. And I thought about leaving, but I honestly felt trapped by parental expectations, by student loan debt, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it now as an adult, but by the fear that people would see me as a failure if I walked away from that after all those years and all that money. So I kept going, and in my 11th year of practice, I decided to take a year off to parent full-time and to think about what I was going to do with my future. And at the end of that year, I had absolutely no idea. What I did have, though, was a seriously diminished bank balance, and that's always inspiring. So I started to think about how I could use what I had learned in my travels to make some decisions about what to do next, to analyze it through that lens, all those things that I had learned. And here's where I got. With apologies to Forrest Gump, life is, in fact, not at all like a box of chocolates. In fact, you do know what you're going to get most of the time because things and people follow logical patterns. Life is like a choose-your-own-adventure game. You start with a seemingly infinite number of paths that you can take, and you have to assess to figure out which path to take. You have to assess your skills, your resources, your tools. You need to figure out what you need and you don't have. You need to figure out your strengths and weaknesses. You need to identify the risks and benefits of any one path that you might take. You need to team with others who have things that you might need and things where you have things that they might need as well. So there's a symbiotic relationship. And you use that calculus to choose one or at least a limited number of paths. So what does that have to do with career choice? So let's start at the beginning of that. We needed to identify tools. So in career choice and career transition, Your tools are your education, your experience, and your skills. That's what they are. They are not your major or your job title. Step away from those. So dangerous, the major and the job title. You need to be able to identify what it is that you can do, what it is that you have done, what you can bring to people, and you need to be able to communicate about that effectively. So I want to go back to that HR guy I talked about at the beginning who wanted to go into operations management. So he goes up to a friend and he says, I'm an HR generalist. And you know where that's going to get him? That's going to take him down one road, and it's going to be another human resources position. But let's say that guy takes another tack, because anybody who knows a human resources generalist knows that they do a whole lot of things. So how about if that human resources generalist says, I hire, train, and coach professionals at all levels of the organization. I've developed plans for building morale during reductions in force. I've developed new operations procedures in order to move people throughout the organization. All of a sudden, that person is sounding like he can do a whole lot of different jobs. You can move those pieces around and you can make them work in all sorts of situations. And all of a sudden, he has options. And it's important to remember that when we talk about choice and change, we don't need to talk about anything wild and crazy. Minor changes, minor variations can really be life-changing. So by moving around those pieces, you can create a thing that creates an entirely different life for you. Not everybody is going to jump off the grid and go design custom surfboards or open an olive oil store. Think about what you can do with that change. You can use your institutional knowledge in a different role within a company you're in. You can move from being a customer to a vendor because now you understand what your customers are going to want and you can be successful in that role. All sorts of things can absolutely change what goes on in your life. So this exercise broadens all your possibilities of what you can do in your life. But it's important to note that it also creates really meaningful boundaries because we're talking about actual skills and how we can use those skills feasibly down different avenues for growth and change. This isn't I want to be a cowboy time. You've got to really think about what you can do. So imagine that you're a product manager for a minute and you've decided that you're going to do things the way you've always done it, notwithstanding changes in the market or changes in the machinery for manufacture. Guess what? You're a really crappy product manager. And this is exactly the same thing. If you're doing that with yourself, you're mismanaging the product of you. So once we're done and we've assessed our tools and we've learned how to talk about them a little bit, we're going to talk about aptitudes. Everybody has things that they can do for hours and feel energized and other things they can do for 5 minutes and they need a nap. I don't think that's an unfamiliar feeling for anybody. We need to identify what those things are for us. The reality is, if you do something that you hate doing, you're never going to be as good as somebody with the same training who loves what they're doing. The recipe for success is finding things that you don't hate to do. It's not being a grown-up to do things you hate. Sure, we all have to do them sometimes. That kind of comes with it. But in terms of both happiness and professional success, you're going to be better at a job that you like doing. So after we assess our skills and our kind of natural abilities, the things we're wired to do, we need to talk about the other things in our life. We need to order our priorities because all of our choices are always limited or sometimes enhanced by other things in our lives that matter. You need to identify the things that matter to you and you need to rank them and you need to make really hard decisions about what you're willing to take from one area to see more success in another area. It may be that you don't make a change in your career even if you're unhappy because other things depend upon it. Maybe the opinion of your parents or friends. It may be that your family depends on a certain level of income, whatever it might be. But you have to make those hard choices. My example of this is those chickens that were pecking at my legs on that train. I could have traveled in much more comfort and livestock free, which would have been nice. But if I'd done that, it would have cost me more money and I would not have been able to afford to go to Tibet and see that sky burial. And for me, pecked legs, totally worth it. It's not even a close call. That's my value judgment. But you have to make that about all these sorts of decisions that come up in your life. So after we talk about our competencies and our aptitudes and our priorities, we need to look at the feasibility of paths that we might have identified for ourselves. And we need to look at whether there's demand in an area, whether you might need another degree or some other sort of training to go into things. You need to look at whether or not you might need to move to a different geographic area. All of those things obviously are going to impact your decision. And you can find that information in a lot of different places. There's books and articles. Professional associations have great websites for it. But the best place to get information like that is to simply talk to people who are in the field, to do informational interviewing. And informational interviewing gives you real stories and real information about things you're thinking about. No gloss, it's not, I will tell you that I went to law school partially because of LA law, I still blame it. You're not getting this filtered view of things. You talk to people and you find out what their lives are really like. And when you do that, you also create a relationship with somebody who is already in the field and who has access to information about opportunities in that field and access to other people who have more information about opportunities in that field. That's called networking, and now we're going to get to the part that nobody ever likes to hear about. I try not to use network as a verb because it scares people. But building and maintaining networks is essential if you're going to have a serial career, if you're going to move into different things. You're going to need people who are going to help you along the way. And so networking is hard. I'm not going to deny it. I've been teaching people to network for years, and I would have had a really sad career if it were easy. But there are simple things about starting to network. You need to figure out who you know. You need to figure out who they know. And you need to be willing to have real conversations with them about your job and ask them who else they know who you might be able to talk to. And then the hard part, you do need to actually go out and talk to people that you don't know. You may want to do it through service. You may want to do it through going to a basketball game, whatever it is that gets you out of the house and talking to people that aren't in your regular circle. And be willing to have more incisive conversations than you might already be doing. I promise you, it'll enhance your life in a number of different ways. But most of all, for job change, it'll give you an opportunity to talk about career in a non-charged atmosphere and to develop pathways to getting where you want to go. So I'm going to close here before they give me the hook, because I think it's coming pretty quickly. And I just want to sum up by reminding you about a few things we talked about. I want you to remember that career isn't a straight road, that for a lot of people, change is actually an indicator of success. Sometimes you're going to take the interstate, but sometimes you're going to take the back roads. It's going to take you longer to get places, but you're going to learn things you never even knew that you needed to know. And sometimes you may want to take the interstate and it's closed, so you don't have options. You better figure out another way. Whatever road you take, just remember that you need to know as much as you can about yourself, about others, about the economic climate and the world we live in. And if you take that and you tailor your actions and your plans to that, you'll be able to make the most of this moment. Thanks so much.